thanks for joining us at Point Blank. I'm E-von.
And I'm Poh Kwan. If you were with us yesterday, you have caught our special on the by-election that happened at Pematang Poh, Penang.
And that's right, and you should have known by now that Anwar has won a landslide victory, claiming more than 30,000 or 66.64% of the votes.
And we had Dr. Oi Ki Bing from Institute of Southeast Asian Studies to chat with us mostly on Anwar's legacies and his reformacy promises yesterday, right?
That's right, and today we have another studio guest here, Bruce Wills, and we're going to discuss the implications of Anwar's victories in this by-election and whether he can deliver his own promises to the people.
Yes, if you've been reading the Straits Times review section, I don't think you will feel that.
Yeah, you won't be any stranger to Bruce
at all. Yeah, okay.
That's right. But before we discuss more with Bruce and you as well, before we discuss the issue at length, let's just take a quick look at this. Anwar, well, he's the man of the moment. Well, he's the Malaysian opposition de facto leader. And right now he is savouring the sweet taste of victory after a landslide victory in the by-election poll yesterday. Well, it's jubilance in the streets of Pematang Poh, Anwar's home state in Penang.
Yes, you can see the fireworks.
Indeed.
Yeah. And on the other side of the fence, the victory of the shaken government's BN. Yeah. You can see already Prime Minister Abdullah Ahmad Badawi has faced calls to quit from within the United Malays National Organisation or UMNO.
Some unrest within the ranks of UMNO itself. Well, and the people are crying for Anwar. Reformasi. That's the battle cry of the Anwar supporters, isn't it?
Yeah. And you can see there are all three young supporters, aren't they?
Yeah, well, the by-elections clearly a thundering success, as we can see, and it eases Anwar's path to possibly becoming Prime Minister. Now he's on his way. Now he's back in Parliament.
Yep. So, Bruce, what do you think about Anwar's victory in this by-election?
Well, it's certainly a very important one, I think. Especially the size of the election, not just the victory itself, which was widely expected. I think the fact that it's so large implies that a significant number of Malays voted for him, and I think this was actually absolutely crucial for Anwar, because as you remember, many of his critics in UMNO have been saying that Malays shouldn't vote for him because that will be the end of UMNO special privileges and so on. And the fact that Malays have voted for him, I think, reinforces his claim to leadership and will certainly have created a lot of dissension within UMNO, worries about it in the last few days.
Yeah, that should have quelled any fears about him taking the multiracial tack in his political move within Pematang Poh itself. But also, the big question is, Anwar, like many politicians campaigning, has promised a lot of things. Yeah, and he has put forth some pretty ambitious plans for reform once he gets into power. And some actually even pretty immediately upon getting into power. And riding on the back of public outrage over the government's 41% fuel price hike, for example, he's reached out to the people where it hurts the most, well, their pockets. Well, Anwar's promised to shield citizens from rising prices, saying that he'll lower petrol prices immediately when he comes into power.
He has also pledged to end a system of affirmative action for ethnic Malays and replace it with a more competitive, merit-based system.
Other promises Anwar has made include removing corruption and nepotism in Malaysia.
Something that Malaysia has been synonymous with in the past, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and Anwar also said he will bring about change in governance by ensuring transparency, judiciary independence, and central bank policy reforms.
Well, that's quite a mouthful. I couldn't have said all that in one breath. So, Bruce, we know that Anwar has promised many things, and of course, every politician would offer all these things as part of
during
campaign.
the run-up to the election.
Yeah, but if we were to sort of deconstruct, one by one, his promises, like for example, his promise to lower oil prices.
Yes, I think this is possibly the most worrying. I mean, here we have a former finance minister who many would say should know better. Earlier in the year, when Abdullah was talking about this issue, he said, look, if we maintain the subsidies at their current level, the government will end up paying the equivalent of the the entire budget that we spend on education, health and defence combined. Now, if Anwar now says, I'm going to put those subsidies back in as is, the money's got to come from somewhere. And the most obvious place would be to take it out of development expenditure, which really isn't a good idea if you're thinking about long-term development of the economy. Of course, he could borrow, which would be the other possibility on the international markets. Now, at the moment, Malaysia's debt-to-GDP ratio is around 43%, which is among the highest in Southeast Asia. Yet, up to date, Malaysia has had good credit ratings. In other words, they've been able to borrow money fairly cheaply. And one of the reasons has been because those lending the money are confident that Malaysia will spend it well. In other words, on development expenditure, not on subsidies as in, say, Indonesia or the Philippines and so on. But if Anwar then goes to the international market and says, I want money because I want to spend it on subsidies, then I think those international markets are going to say, right, well, you're going to have to pay a higher price.
Okay.
So either way, even if he's going to take it out of the development funds or if he's going to borrow, it doesn't seem, you know...
There's a way out.
Yes,
what about taxation? Would you think that's a viable
Well, that would be
option?
unpopular, wouldn't it? And one of the problems and Anwar government will have is that whatever happens, he's going to have a fairly thin majority in Parliament, right? Which means that he's going to be constantly watching his popularity ratings to make sure that nobody wants to switch.
Yeah.
He's going to be faced with an opposition which has a good deal of money, well organised, itching to get back into power.
Yes.
These are going to be on his mind all the time, so he's going to have to be following populist policies. He's going to have to continue with the subsidies. He won't have much choice there. Those things are rather worrying, really. And this is a Prime Minister at the same time who has pledged, as you say, to get rid of corruption and so on. This is going to be a tall order for a Prime Minister who has a very thin parliamentary majority.
Definitely. And he has to win at least 30 BN MPs to his side, if not more.
Yes.
Even 30 is not really a comfortable number, is it?
No, it wouldn't. It would be very thin. I mean, and many of them, we believe, would probably come from East Malaysia. Now, that would come with a price. I mean, those East Malaysian MPs will say, well, okay, we'll join you, but how about some more development funds for East Malaysia? And he's already going to be short of development funds, remember?
Okay.
I'm sorry that will go into subsidies. None for you, I'm afraid.
Oh, then he may not have his majority. He'll have to find the money.
Exactly. And so he is in quite a tough position, isn't he? It's like between a rock and a hard place.
It is going to be difficult for him. If you talk about the corruption and nepotism, again, you're faced with a difficult issue here. I mean, Malaysia has seen decades of rule in which businessmen have got used to the idea of looking for protection or special favours from powerful politicians, not necessarily the Prime Minister, but others in the system. Now, they're in that habit of doing that, and politicians are in the habit of looking for it, perhaps. But if he has a new government, how is he going to stop it? He'd need to be a very powerful Prime Minister to put his foot down and say, no, this is not going to happen. And he's got to have a comfortable majority in Parliament to do it, and he's not going to have that. So there are going to be a lot of problems for a new Anwar government if he's serious about carrying out the reforms that he wants.
Yeah, and he has also promised some MPs in the East Malaysian states of Sabah and Sarawak that he's going to increase the oil royalties to these two states from 5% to 20%, in order to win them over to the Pakatan Rakyat side. How feasible do you think this is going to work?
That just feeds into what I was talking to you about before, about how you promise everything to everybody, and then how do you deliver? And when you discover that you can't, you have to disappoint some people, can you still remain in power and do that?
Yeah, that's the thing. His critics are saying he's populist, and he's a chameleon, even. So he's just swaying wherever the wind blows. So how is he going to feasibly juggle all of this? He's going to be in a tough place because he is pushing for multiculturalism, while at the same time he has to please, the Malay voters as well. So,
well, I think the one thing he does have in his favour is that he's a very experienced politician. All right. And I don't think we should underestimate that. He's been in the game for a long time now, and perhaps when we see these issues, like I've mentioned, so many problems, that doesn't mean to say that it's an impossibility, but that really that we need to be more realistic. I mean, I'd see if you look on the internet and so on particularly, you see a lot of sort of excitable people running analysis about how, you know, things are changing in Malaysia, and indeed they are changing. But are they going to change necessarily in the long term for the better? You may remember, I mean, some of your viewers from the old generation remember when Mahathir came to power in 1981. He was seen as a reformer because he was promising very similar things: an attack on corruption. He actually released internal security detainees. He said, "I'm going to put the fear of God into the corrupt." I remember that phrase in particular.
A very fiery phrase. Yeah.
Yes, and improved the efficiency of the civil service. He was the one who, for example, said we're going to have the names. The civil service is going to have their name on there, and he did it. He wore it all the time. Mahathir, yes. It just said Mahathir. It didn't say Prime Minister Mahathir. Just Mahathir.
Okay.
He used to turn up at ministries unannounced, 9 a.m. in the morning, and expect the boss to be there. You know, the head of the department. If the department head wasn't there, there'd be heads rolling.
He certainly kept them on their toes.
Well, he did for a while, and it really looked good. But what I'm saying is that, you know, we're seeing a similar sort of leader now, with certainly with similar ideas. I'm not trying to suggest that Anwar is going to turn into a Mahathir or something, but we need to think about these possibilities. We've been through this once. We're going through it again. If he pulls it off, well and good. But there are many problems along the way.
Exactly, that's the other question, because even if he does eventually become Prime Minister, how sustainable will his policies and his sort of stand be, really? You know,
because we have seen similar moves by Abdullah Badawi when he just regained power, right?
Exactly.
In 2000.
Yes, I think that's been a problem. Part of Abdullah Badawi's problem is that he disappointed many people after raising their expectations, and perhaps he raised their expectations a little bit too much, and the result of it. Certainly the whole party was in the March elections. I think that was very much part of it, the disappointment.
Yes.
But if we look ahead, the other area that we haven't looked at perhaps is the role of the bureaucracy in all of this. Thailand, I think, is a good comparison. In Thailand, we see a Prime Minister who appears to be under siege, very much like Abdullah Badawi. But I think the situation there is rather different in the sense that if the Thai government falls, I don't think that people are going to be particularly concerned. This has been happening in Thailand for many years. The bureaucracy in Thailand is used to it. The bureaucracy is used to formulating the policy and implementing it, because in the past we haven't had long periods of government in Thailand that have implemented policy. They haven't been in power long enough. In Malaysia, you have a completely different situation. Here, the Malaysian bureaucracy is virtually the creation of UMNO. If UMNO is no longer there, will the new government get the same level of cooperation with the bureaucracy? In a situation where the government is not in a position to formulate policy because it's too busy trying to ensure its own political survival, can the Malaysian bureaucracy formulate policy for it and implement that policy? We don't know. We know it can be done in Thailand. We don't know it can be done in Malaysia.
That's right. Well, on the issue of Anwar's mandate as a leader, on this note, a report in The Edge Daily online, the media report says that for most people it's clear that the battle for Permatang Poh was not actually about the BN or PKR. It was not a fight between parties. Well, the fight was all about two prime ministers in waiting, slugging it out before the national audience.
Well, that's an interesting way of putting it. I mean, we're talking about Najib and Anwar, I presume. And that sort of implies that Abdullah's had it. And I think perhaps that may be a little too early to say that. I mean, one argument might be that Abdullah is going to remain in power simply because Najib has his own weaknesses as well. And is the whole party going to unite behind Najib? Would Tunku Razali, for example, think that maybe he could be a better Prime Minister, given the fact that, as I said, Najib has his own weaknesses which relate to connections or alleged connections with murder cases? I mean...
But Anwar's got his own fair share too, the two of them. Yeah.
Anwar's got his own fair yes, of course. I mean,
they've got pretty equal weightage, if you ask me.
Yeah, well, in that case, Abdullah might win out by default. But I don't know whether that's going to happen. But I'm saying that the statement that you quoted there seems to leave Abdullah out of the equation, and I wouldn't want to throw him out just yet.
Yeah, but you know, the question is really that, because we saw Najib Razak pretty riled himself. You know, he was out there on the streets and concerning himself with this very small rural constituency in the Permatang Power polls. You know, house to house,
survey the same
wrangling for votes,
marketplaces, hawker centres.
Yeah, he was working really hard. You know.
Well, yeah, I think trying to convince people that he is a prime minister.
That's how concerned he was. So,
the interesting thing I think is going to be on Friday for a start. That's the thing we want to watch. We know that Anwar is going to be sworn in tomorrow. Now Friday we still have debate in Parliament, and it'll be interesting to see what Anwar actually does. I think his strategy long term is going to be to try and force a wedge between UMNO leaders, because after all he wants some defectors, right? So how will he be able to use the debates in order to do that? I think that's what we'll be watching for on the Friday. As far as Abdullah's survival is concerned, we know that there's an agreement for him to step down in 2010, but I think for many of us, I think the focus will be more on the party elections in December. Can he survive those? Now, typically a sitting prime minister or sitting president in UMNO is not challenged. I mean, it's been rare. I think it was 1986 once when Mahathir was challenged. So we'll be watching that. Will Najib decide to go for broke in December? It'll very much depend on whether he thinks that he can win, because there's no point if you go for it and lose, then you can be pretty sure you won't be Deputy Prime Minister for very long.
But already, you know, there seems to be ripples in UMNO, within UMNO itself. Today, there were calls within UMNO for Abdullah to quit. So, what are we seeing inside UMNO itself? Do you see
I
those?
would think.
Yeah. I won't be surprised, actually.
No, I think that they will be arguing amongst themselves as to who is responsible. Well, they have been for some time. Who is responsible for this mess? And perhaps they'll be, well, for their own good, I would imagine they should be arguing about how do we get out of it, rather than who's responsible for it.
Whose camp should we be on? Was it Anwar's, or is it, you know?
Yes, and I think that some people would argue that perhaps that's the wrong way to be looking.
Oh, why?
What is wrong? What is really wrong? I mean, is it that UMNO has the wrong leaders? Or is it that there's something fundamentally wrong with the party, that it's changed over the years, that, as its critics say, that it's full of nepotism and corruption and so on? Is that true? If that's true, then maybe we should be talking about how to change that, rather than which faction of UMNO we should be
We're talking about something
supporting.
systematic, not something pegged to one leader.
Certainly that's what most critics would say. And I think whether the question is how many UMNO leaders would I mean, privately, they wouldn't say it in public, but privately, do they believe that? And if they do, then they should be working on that, to deal with that aspect of it. I think they'll be very worried right now that Anwar got such a huge majority, because, as I said before, it implies a significant number of Malays who are prepared to abandon UMNO and abandon, apparently, what UMNO stands for, which is a very strong Malay political dominance in the society.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we have many more questions.
Yeah, we do.
After
we have
the
many
break,
more questions for Bruce.
And
but,
if you out there, if you do have questions for Bruce, if you do have questions for us, contact us any way you like, okay? You can look at our comment box, you can MMS us, you can email us, you can call us, and we'll bring you footage of Anwar's victory speech after the break. See you later.
See you.